Okay, it's time to talk about the lectures. Introduction to Sport Governments is our first chapter in sport policy. So let's take a look at an overview of the sport industry. It's continually expanding and evolving. The scope in 2014 industry value was approximately 60.5 billion and projected to be 73.5 billion in 2019. It's people and service oriented. Sport governance courses look at the big picture, the overall interaction of the organizations, and how the various segments work together. So what are those segments? We have professional sport, intercollegiate sport, Olympic and Paralympic movements, recreational sport, facility management, event management, sport for people with disabilities, health and fitness, sport club management, interscholastic sport, sport marketing, and the legal aspects of sport. And they intersect because the legal aspects of sport would cover a professional athlete and who is participating in a professional sport with their contract. That's a huge, as well as negotiations. That's a huge part of the legal aspects. Okay, so your point of view, what is your reaction to these statements? I know you can't answer me, but at least take a minute and think about these. The global sport industry has a value that's higher than some nations' GDP. What's GDP? Gross domestic product, meaning how much money their country makes with all the stuff they sell. So, should the sport industry be bigger than a whole nation's GDP? Well, it's bound to happen. Our reliance on sport is great. So, what are your feelings about how much emphasis is placed on sport? Well, I don't think you'd be in this class if you didn't think if you thought there was too much emphasis. Um, but could it be just the right amount? The definition of sports government, the exercise of power and authority in sport organizations to determine the organizational mission. Why are we here, basically? Membership, eligibility, regulatory power. Three levels. There's three levels: local, national, and international sport. I mean, you could argue collegiate too, amateur, but that's the main idea. So what is an organization? This is going to come up throughout the semester, so keep this in mind. Identity, the program of activity, membership, clear boundaries, permanency, division of labor, hierarchy of authority, formal rules or procedures. So what the regulatory power is the ability to enforce rules or impose punishments or sanctions. I'm sure you've all heard of Deflategate, the scandal when Tom Brady was connected with a equipment manager to lessen the amount of air in balls to make them easier to catch. And he was punished by Roger Goodell, the football commissioner, and he appealed that. And what he appealed on was not the fact any rules with the case, but he said that Goodell didn't have the authority to impose the punishment that he was imposing. So Tom Brady eventually backed down, but it was an interesting take on who the commissioner wouldn't be able to impose punishments. Anyway, influences on organizations. You have external influences, meaning outside of our organization, their task or operating or general environment. We have internal within our organization where we have specific policies and procedures. The need for awareness. Sport organizations are constantly interacting with various environments, and sport managers must be aware of what's happening and adapt accordingly. And the COVID-19 pandemic is a excellent example of how sport managers have to be aware of what's going on because it's ever changing. And it depends where you're at. As you know, you saw through the football season that some teams were allowed to have people in their stands and some weren't. So, okay, another point of view. You work for a minor league team, and one of your players has been using social media to comment on his fellow teammates, players on opposing teams, and journalists. He also has publicly revealed some things that are best left private. What kind of policies could you put in place to encourage social media use but address the inappropriate usage? Well, it's not cool. He's going to not make very many friends if that's what he's doing. But some things we can make it very explicit policy that defines what can and cannot be done and make our players sign off on that, make it part of their contract, um, make it part of our employee handbook, depending on what level we're at. Or you could even hire a social media expert to approve all posts to social media, which of course you would have to have approval to do that in their contract. Okay. The 5 R's of good governance: regulations, rules, rankings, records, and results. Some organizational units, and we're going to look at these throughout the semester, the makeup of the governing body of different organizations, for example, the Olympics. You have general assemblies, executive committees, governing bodies, management councils, standing committees, which are committees that meet regularly and are part of our organization all the time. For example, might be a marketing committee to talk about ideas for new swag, could be. An ad hoc committee would be something that is necessary but isn't going to be always there, like possibly a COVID-19. You may always have a pandemic committee for emergencies, but most likely you're just going to have it be ad hoc and only when the crisis is going on. You have your executive staff. You have Constitution and bylaws outline an organization's basic functions. The Constitution is the governing document. Core principles and values. The bylaws are operational in nature and how the organization conducts business. You know, a constitution, just like the U.S. Constitution, just it governs the sport agency versus the country. So why do we study sport governance? We want to understand the big picture, how people interact with each other and how we're affected. Understand how government fits in the sport management curriculum, and understand how governance will fit in your career.